now there we go.
Thank you.
So we are in the middle of cohort two, the second cohort that St. Basil has run, and this you all hopefully will all become members of cohort three. St. Basil's happened in an interesting way. If you've heard the story, forgive me, but I always enjoy telling it, I should say. Um, my wife was in the midst of uh, labor pains with my fourth child when suddenly um, I received a phone call from a Orthodox priest who I knew more or less, and I have no idea why I answered. I must have had an inkling of something, but things were getting very serious over with my wife, and he proceeds to ask me a question that I never thought I would hear, and that was literally, if I could make your dreams come true in the writing sense, what would it be? And here I am with the phone, all my dreams about to be answered, and my wife getting very serious about having baby number four. And yes, it was a home birth on purpose. So for a second there, I looked at her, looked at the phone, looked at her, and I asked Father Adam, can I please get back to you in a little while? I cannot speak about this right now. Plus, I didn't really know the answer to the question. So it was very convenient that my wife decided to have labor pains at that moment. She proceeded to have a wonderful birth, the least problematic birth of them all, a wonderful child, his name is Elias, and he is, yes, he's quite a wonder. Uh, he looks like he's five. He's three. He looks like he's five. And he's also named after a warrior saint. I don't know why we did that. That was a bad idea. I mean, I'm sure it's going to be great when he's 25, not when he's three. Oh my goodness. So he's a wonderful baby. And the other baby, St. Basil's, I had a little time to think about it. And this was right around the time when Jonathan Pajot was starting to hit his peak, but he hadn't quite reached stratospheric heights. And a certain man named Paul Kingsnorth was also starting to reach stratospheric heights, but didn't quite get to the point where he wouldn't answer my emails. Uh, I was talking to these wonderful, wonderful men. I was doing various projects with them, and I thought, this is a really interesting moment that we're in. It's an interesting time for storytellers. It's an interesting time for people who are interested in building culture, people who are interested in gathering the beautiful amid the ashes of a civilization that seems to be crumbling around them. And I thought, why not invite all of them and have them teach a year long writing course that would be like the go to writing course for all people, mostly of faith, but people who are really hanging on to the traditional forms of storytelling and really want to hark back to the kind of stories that we loved as kids, the Lord of the Rings, the Narnia, and all of the many other things that aren't necessarily children's fiction, but do hark back to a different kind, a different age, a different way of telling stories than we find in the Barnes and Noble of today, for the most part. And Father Adam said, "Well, your wish is my command." And then so I proceeded to ask every single one of the people that I had on my list, headlined by Paul Kingsnorth and Jonathan Pajot. And for some very strange reason, all of them immediately said yes. And I was very shocked by this and very happy. And soon after that, we had our first cohort, which I don't know how we managed it because this was very much a figuring it out on the job kind of situation. But it was a wonderful success. Two of our first cohort are actually here present with us, and as and one uh, in the midst of cohort two. So Aisha, I'm not sure if you have positive or negative things to say, but I suppose we shall have to wait and see for the Q&A portion. But really, the more that we've been doing this together, and now we've been doing this for 3 years. We've had two cohorts with 1 year break in between. The more it's really struck me how St. Basil is more than just a collection of brilliant minds. What it is an opportunity for people who really love stories, for people who really love the transformative power of a story well told, to be able to get together, to be able to learn how to tell those stories well. Because the fact is that there is, especially amongst people who are not in the mainstream, all of us here, I hope, there is a level of expertise that is often missing when it comes to the plain facts of how to write or how to tell a story well. It's not something that we're taught in school. It's not something that we are given even in fine art programs. More often than not, the joke is that MFA programs are more geared at churning out future teachers at MFA programs than they are published authors. And that certainly, in my experience, has been the case. There's a lot of people out there who have resonated with the words and the messages and the stories of people like Paul Kingsnorth and Jonathan Pajot, but who have not yet gotten to the point where they can get their books, their stories to a level where people will notice them, to a competent enough level where people will say, okay, that's something interesting. Because it's not enough to have a good story in mind. You also have to be able to tell it well. You also need to know the rules of storytelling, but you also need to understand how to put them into a context that will then surprise your reader because we live in an age where people read a lot, even if we are coming to the crest of that, and perhaps literacy, widespread literacy, will not really be the norm in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, but we're still in a time and in a place where most people read and read widely. So they have expectations, and those expectations are not artificially created. They have to do with an innate understanding of how story functions. I was told recently by a mentor of mine that our storytelling self, the self that understands, that thinks in terms of story, is actually about 10 years older than our critical self, the one that is trained in schools. Because the storytelling self begins at roughly age 2, when our parents start to tell us those stories and we start to navigate the world around us in terms of the stories that we heard from our parents. And so we have all that time from 2 to about 10 or so when we begin to be trained by our teachers how to critically read the world. All that knowledge is still there, and it's intuitive, and it understands intrinsically what makes a story good. Most of us have had that beaten out of us, and to be able to re engage with that, to rekindle it, and then also to be able to kind of shut down the critical self that is such a detriment to being able to write and tell a story well. Well, that is something that our teachers are incredibly good at. It's something that Paul in Kingsnorth in particular is a master at. You will probably all have heard who our teachers are. I'll briefly go over the list. Paul Kingsnorth is probably our headliner. Jonathan Pajot, Catherine Bolger Hyde, former editor of fiction at Ancient Faith, herself a multi-published fiction writer. Samira Kawash, who also has been published by the Big Five, and Nicole Rokas, Dr. Nicole Rokas, who has a wonderful course about integrating the creative and the spiritual lives. And me, I do all the other stuff, the technical stuff, the stuff about the world of publishing, and basically helping you navigate both the creative, the craft, and the business side of publishing. But really, one of the great things that we have is a new thing that is just starting over the past year or so is now we have an active publishing arm that is related to St. Basil's directly. It's called the Wood Between Worlds Press. It is now officially started. We recently crowdfunded our first book, and we're about to start a crowdfunding campaign, about to announce 3 more authors and a very exciting campaign to come very soon. But the idea here is that St. Basil's is attracting the kind of writer that is just on the cusp of being publishable. Someone who has worked already on producing a decent number of words in storytelling format, but hasn't yet quite reached that level where everybody who reads the story thinks, okay, I should be seeing this in a bound book in a bookstore. That's the purpose of what we're doing here. We're expanding your storytelling tools. We're helping you learn the different techniques you can use, and we're trying to push you over that hump to give you just enough of the craft and just enough of the business to be able to really start you off, so that at the end of your time with us, you will perhaps year honing and perfecting that novel that you just haven't been able to finish, or that collection of short stories, or that memoir even, because narrative nonfiction does also follow a lot of the rules of fiction. And yes, as soon as you're done, submission is open to Wood Between Worlds Press, and there is preference given to St. Basil's students so that they can even jump the line if necessary to get their books out. I'm looking at several um, manuscripts from former St. Basil students, and I'm very happy with them. And I am hopeful that I will soon be announcing publication plans for them. So this is definitely something that is an advantage to coming to St. Basil's. Not that it's a pay for play kind of model, because that's not how it works. It's not the fact that you come here that makes you publishable. It's what you do with the knowledge that you receive, hopefully. This is not something that we were able to offer cohort one, at least not during the time that they were here. So this is something that I'm very excited about developing. And ultimately, Wood Between Worlds will become something of an author's guild where the the name itself will become associated with a certain kind of storytelling voice, with a certain kind of storytelling style, with a certain reading experience that will attract people merely by mention of the name. And so to join it will become a matter of uh, something that authors want to achieve, not simply a minor benefit. I could talk for hours about all this stuff. This is all wonderful, fascinating to me. I love it. But I'd much rather hear from you. I'd much rather hear what your questions are, what your hopes, what your uh, dreams, and perhaps the things that you're afraid of that I might perhaps dispel. So please, the floor is yours. You can raise your electronic hand or physical hand, up to you. I will gladly call on you. And yes, since this is mostly a collection of people who are Orthodox or Orthodox adjacent, nobody ever raised their hand first. Everybody's humble. Yes, yes, yes. Let's get over it. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. All right, Kassiani, very good. Go ahead and unmute
Thanks.
yourself. Hmm.
Um, Hi, I'm Cassiani. I am curious a little bit about the vision of St. Basil in terms of, so you're talking about Wood Between the Worlds and kind of cultivating this spot where people will know exactly what they're getting from the Wood Between the Worlds brand. I'm just curious with the amount of content out there and the, I guess, really fast-paced ways in which people are reading things, consuming things, talking about things. What's your vision for how to, I guess, stand the test of time is a little grandiose, but how do you, what's your plan for Wood Between the Worlds to stand out and to make a mark in that super fragmented, super chaotic media landscape?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. So it's a bit of a beg the question kind of question, but I'm glad you asked it. First off, there is a tendency, absolutely, in the modern publishing space to utilize something like this that people call volume publishing as the only way of getting attention, which is basically churn out as many books as you can, sign as many authors as you can, and hope that something sticks. And the target audience for that sort of publishing model is are readers who are mostly on Amazon, read things that are very specific in genre, and who mostly do not really have a memorable reading experience of a specific book, but are more inclined towards a genre specific experience. This is particularly true of genres such as urban fantasy and the various forms of um, romance, in particular romantasy, which is a really, really huge um, genre at the moment. The thing is, what I'm finding to be the case, and I'm not the only one to notice this, is that there is, well, first off, there's two things. One, there's the backlash is beginning, because that sort of publishing model is perfect for AI generated second-rate crap. And the thing is, if you don't think that an AI can create a full novel, it actually can. The latest versions of these large language models, if you give them the right prompts and if you give them enough information, they actually can churn out a completed novel. And I know of several publishing houses in the indie space that are actually using this as their publishing model. What they do is that they've stopped having hundreds of titles a year um, as their as their goal, which is insane as it is, right? Hundreds, as you know, now it's tens of thousands. So they're trying to actually publish tens of thousands of copies of unique titles per year, because in a an increasingly frenetic marketplace that prioritizes quick, not thoughtful reading, that's the inevitable response. And those kinds of readers are not our audience. They're not. They're not going to like our books. We're not writing it for them. Who are we writing for? We are writing for an audience that is largely underserved by the current publishing model. The current publishing model tends to prioritize readers who like to read fast and who don't like to, um, who are not wedded to author names. This is a bit of a generalization because there are authors who will attract based on their name. They are few, and uh, many of them you will not even know because the kinds of niches that they attract are numerous, but they're very specific. They're not these. This is not the kind of situation nowadays as it was in the times of Borders, where you had perennial bestsellers like Stephen King, like John Grisham, or like any number of those others, who commanded the attention of an entire monolithic culture. Who, when they published a new book, everybody was talking about it. It was making number one in the New York Times bestseller list, and the New York Times bestseller list actually meant something because it actually reflected numbers of sales as opposed to the editorial decision of a few people inside the New York Times building, which is what it is now, and they're not even hiding it. It's an actual fact. So all that to say that there is a large number of readers who do not read much of what comes out nowadays, but who are parents of kids, but who love classical literature, or who love certain niches areas of modern literature. They like to read Eugene Vodolaskin, for example, the novel Loris, which was a huge international bestseller. They like the experience of reading something that's slower, that's a little bit more difficult, but that isn't simply self-indulgent navel gazing, which is the majority of 20th and 21st century literary fiction. It doesn't have much substance. It's not interested in the ultimate things. It's not interested in the kinds of human, eternal human questions that literature has traditionally asked and answered. There's a huge gap in in the market these days, um, with a huge underserved reading population that we're trying to find and attract. And it's already starting. These are the people that are listening to Jonathan Pageau's videos. And you can tell because as soon as he published a simple 36-page fairy tale, you had what, 5, 6, 7,000 people show up for a pre order campaign on an obscure crowdfunding platform. And the thing is selling like hotcakes because people want meaningful, beautiful literature that reaches back but also looks towards the future. That's what that's the kind of writer we're trying to attract. That's the kind of reader we're trying to attract. Will we be successful? Time will tell. But we have given ourselves a very concrete and specific goal in terms of the numbers of people we're trying to attract by the end of a 2-year period, and the numbers of authors we're trying to sign by that period. And we'll see whether or not we're starting to scale that mountain by the end of that period. But I'm very hopeful. So thank you for the question. Benicio, please.
Yeah, so my question, I want to make sure my perception of the course material is correct as I was reading through.
Sure.
Um, I'm wondering if you can speak to sort of the general um approach towards improving our writing that we're going to be taking. Like, from what I saw, it seemed like it was a lot about general structure and um trying to understand, if I can use this like the shape of stories broadly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And some of my training in the past was more focused on how do you focus on the level of the sentence. And so I'm kind of wondering what the tension is there, or
Yeah, that's an
what.
excellent question.
Yeah, that's it.
So the way that we're teaching it now is we tend to start with the general and the large, the global, the kind of 50,000 foot view. We start with talking about how the creative life and the spiritual life can integrate. We move down from that to talking about the symbolism of world building, how to build a world inside your work of fiction, and how that is directly related to scriptures and how scriptures create a kind of nested world within the narrative of scripture that reflects but also um, contains the real world, so to speak. Then we move even closer and begin to open ourselves to the possibility of nature itself being a setting, and how we can tell stories that are not limited by our own perspective, but are open to the perspective of others around us. These are all still large scale type things. It's the first half of the year is largely dealing with the kinds of questions and issues that we as storytellers need to address before we can get down to the level of story, scene, sentence. Second semester is where we really get into the nitty gritty, where we start talking about the structures of novels, the structures of genres, the structures of scenes, the flow of different kinds of scenes, the uses of different kinds of points of view. I teach that portion primarily, and that is basically taking the essential rules of fiction writing and um, opening up your toolbox so that you understand what you can do and what you can't do, and how to use all the different specific techniques, of which there are not that many on this level, because we're not teaching you advanced craft techniques, but the very basic ones that allow you to get to a point where your story is actually a story and not somebody talking about a story, which is a very important uh, bridge that needs to be crossed, or a hump that needs to be gotten over. And after that, then the riches of all the varieties of tools that you can use begin to uncover themselves. So we're trying to get you over into that particular hump. And then at the end of that is when we talk about the in brief, the business of writing and the landscape of publishing, and what your options are at the end of it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, Jasmine, please.
Hi, everyone. Okay, I have a few questions. So the first one is like, what are the classes like? Are they pre-recorded or is it like a live Zoom? And how many hours a week uh, are they?
Yep.
Are they once a week, multiple times a week? So more in the technical side of the classes?
Sure. So we start the whole class off with a 5 day in-person retreat in upstate New York. This was uh, a really good idea by Father Adam, who established a school and runs it, um, to do the in-person event before we all get to know each other over this virtual space. Because my intuition was to do it the other way around, but it's actually a really good idea because the bonds that you create with your cohort become very strong. Once you go home after that first week, the classes are generally once a week. They can go anywhere from 45, 50 minutes to a lot longer. But for example, Paul Kingsnorth's classes can go as long as I think 4 hours, but it's not 4 hours in front of a screen. He'll teach for 45 minutes to an hour, then he'll send you out into nature for 2 hours, and then he'll welcome you back for another 45 minutes to an hour or so. And those are the most those are the most incredible because you do need a lot of time for them, but they are transformative. Generally, is that's the kind of structure that you'll see for the most part. They are all live streamed on Zoom. Then the recordings will be available afterwards to those who are unable to make it live. We do everything we can to accommodate people's needs so that everybody can be there live. We do have to keep in mind, though, that Paul lives in the UK, and Jonathan is often traveling, so their needs come first. But the teachers are generally they generally try to be flexible when it comes to accommodating the needs of the students. And in terms of homework, before people ask that, that all will also vary. Sometimes it'll be completely optional; you won't have any, and sometimes it'll be quite intensive. You'll have 3 or 4 hours a week, but it won't be too much. And in general, Anna, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think in general you could uh, assume it's going to be about 1 or 2 hours per week of additional homework outside of the classes.
If I can just jump in, I think one thing we also encourage the students to do is to pick a project to work on at the beginning of the year so that they're intensively and intentionally working on something for their own pace. So while there might not be necessarily assigned homework for a given course, it is the hope that students can use that time and that inspiration that they're gathering from the classes to be working on their own novels.
And there are built-in sort of fallow times between classes where I will be doing some limited critique of work that's sent to me in the hopes of inspiring people to actually put in the work during those time periods, where to apply the things that they've learned, or just to put words on paper, because there will be opportunities throughout the year to have specific questions in your like specific problems addressed in your manuscript.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand, so because there's a section that you talk about in your classes that it's like peer editing workshops. So what does that mean? Like we're working on each other's like manuscripts that we sent you for the submissions, or is this something else that we're working on? Like, I'm
Yeah.
just trying to understand that.
Absolutely, it's a good question. So part of what I was very resistant to this idea initially because peer review can be a very damaging thing in writers groups, especially when it's not properly taught. So in the first year, I resisted peer review entirely, and I wanted it to be entirely dependent on the experts, so the experts could give advice that was actually valid. But through the course of year one and now in year two, it's been expressed by a lot of the students. A desire has been expressed to allow for the freedom of some limited peer-to-peer feedback as long as it's properly guided. And we found somebody who does that very well. Dr. Samira Kawash is our teacher. She has an incredible approach to teaching how to talk about other people's works in a way that is at once helpful but also encouraging without it becoming simply an exercise in patting people over the head or eviscerating them, which tends to be one or the other always. Now, in terms of the kinds of things you submit for peer review, that is entirely up to you. So it could be it's probably going to be a small section of something, and it's likely going to be the thing that the one project that you're working on during the course of the year, but it doesn't have to be. I've seen well, we actually haven't gotten to it yet, but people have expressed different desires when it comes to that, and it's really up to you. And if you really don't want to take part in it, I'm not going to make you. But I do know from experience that the people in both cohorts have had a lot of benefit from it already.
Okay, just a couple of more questions.
Please.
What does post-graduation look like? Do you stay in contact with your graduates? Do you have events for them? Is there any kind of follow-up? I know you mentioned the publishing, What's Between the World, that's
Yeah.
something, but is there anything else that you do?
Yes, there is. So eventually we want to get to a point where we offer the option for people to come back at the end of the year and have a kind of in-person graduation in the same place where we had the retreat. And we tried this sort of conditionally with cohort one, and a small percentage of them came, and it was a limited success. We will see if it's possible to increase that and have some sort of a proper matriculation in person. It's difficult for everybody to make it twice in one year to upstate New York, and I do appreciate that. So there will be some sort of opportunity to come back together in person at the end of the year, certainly. In addition to that, uh, the entire course is hosted on a private Circle community. Circle, if you don't know, is an online courses slash community uh, uh, software platform, which is like a self-contained social network, um, sort of. It has a functionality of a forum where you can post and interact with each other. It also has classroom sections. It has different spaces where you can interact with your fellow classes in different ways. It's called the Story Hearth, and it exists in several layers. There is an existing community for people who are not St. Basil members, many of whom are prospective St. Basil members, and many of whom are here with us today, or some of whom I should say, are with us here today. those of you who are in St. Basil's have access to certain functionalities within the Story Hearth Circle community for free, and you will continue to have access to certain functionality, especially a distinct and secret, meaning the rest of the group can't see it, a space for the graduates of your cohort, so you can continue to interact with each other. And Anna can speak more to this, but cohort 1 has continued to interact with each other. They've continued to meet on Zoom regularly. They have get-togethers. They have writing rooms. Um, Maybe Anna, you can tell us a little bit of what kinds of things cohort 1 has been doing after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, I think a lot of the initiative to make things happen weren't necessarily structured by the program, but the relationships that we formed within it were so rich that we continued on our own. So we do have weekly Zoom meetings, and it started out as writing sessions. Now they're mostly times to just catch up, hear what's going on in their lives, and then compare notes on our writing as well. And then outside of that, we also have a group chat. So we're very much involved in each other's lives, and it's been really lovely to watch that beginning to happen with cohort 2 as well.
And yeah, I think that says pretty much everything. Thank you, Anna.
Sure.
I have one last question.
Please.
So if there's a submission that you're like, no, this is not what we're looking for, do you provide like an explanation as to why, or maybe something that we can work on or change? I'm just wondering what your guidelines are, essentially.
Well, it's an interesting question. It's hard to define guidelines because on the one hand, there is an objective quality expectation to all of these. And I am somebody who believes that there is a minimum level of what can be considered objectively good, especially for this program. This is not a beginner program. At the very least, you can call it a kind of advanced beginner, but really it's closer to early to intermediate in terms of the level of writing ability. Some About half, I would say, of the applicants who have been accepted have either published already or should be published already because their writing is that good. So that's sort of the minimum requirement. There is an element of simply taste when it comes to it, and this is not perhaps not something that people are comfortable with hearing, but there is something kind of difficult to describe about the kind of thing that the kind of story that I think would work well within the Wood Between Worlds ecosystem specifically. But I have been surprised by things that I didn't think I would like, just because of the incredible ability of the storyteller. Now, so the response that you will get will be a simple yes or no in terms of the application. However, last year I did extend the courtesy to um, not everybody, but to some people, especially to those who are on the wait list, because we actually had a significant number of people waitlisted because that's how many people were publishable, were good enough to get in. We have only limited spaces. I did set up short 15-minute long one-on-ones where I talked about their submissions, and I was able to suggest improvements if they wanted it. So that's certainly something I'm open to. It will depend on how many people get on the waiting list, if there is one, even in the first place. Generally speaking, if the submission is not up to par in terms of the writing quality, I will probably not say that. Um, if I do, I will be very circumspect about it because it's difficult to hear that for somebody who has not yet realized himself or herself that my writing is not at that level yet. There needs to be a certain level of self-knowledge, which only happens after people have written a certain number of words. It doesn't have to do with pride or humility or anything like that. It's simply a matter of competence, a matter of actually putting words on paper. So hopefully that answers your question, but it's a little bit of a yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Cassandra, go ahead.
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute myself. I have two questions. Sorry, if I may.
Please.
one question is, will there be any guidance in the stylistic portion of the courses on, and you can tell me if this is outside the scope of St. Basil's, but on different types of books? So on what's recommended for, full-length novels versus children's books that are picture books versus graphic novels, in terms of just media?
There will be some specifics in terms of genre, but I will speak probably not at all in terms of the requirements of format, which is the thing is that you don't really need that information within St. Basil's, particularly because what we're dealing with is the stuff you need to know before you get to that point.
Mm.
Um, if you master the um, if you master the stuff that we give you in the course of St. Basil's, it will be very easy for you to go onto a webpage and just say and find out what are the expectations of the reader of this particular format. There's going to be like a short list of things, and you're going to know exactly what to do because you will already have the framework worked out in terms of storytelling in general, and all that stuff. That's already just applying a framework to a more specific example. So I will say that those are the kinds of things that we talk about in Story Hearth, uh, in the regular portion, not in the Saint Basil specific portion of it, but in the author community that is outside of St. Basil's. We have monthly webinars in that community, and those are the kinds of things that sometimes pop up. So that's definitely something to look out for. Yeah.
Thank
And you
you.
had another question.
I do have another question, and I'm sorry this question might force you to have to explain author ecosystems very briefly.
Oh
But
no.
if I'm sorry to put you in this position. But if you were to describe which of those ecosystems Wood Between the Worlds is trying to be and cultivate, I know based on what you just said that it's not desert, but which one or ones do you think it might be?
Okay, so those of you who don't know what author ecosystems are, I'm not going to explain it.
Are.
It's too much for this particular setting. Do look it up though; it's very useful. I will only say this: author ecosystems are less useful to think about when you're thinking about genre. They're much more useful to think about when you're thinking about marketing and sales approaches. So yes, uh, deserts tend to write very tropey fiction, and forests tend to write twists on tropes. But tundras can veer either towards deserts or towards forests, and aquatics do whatever the heck they feel like. So we're not really going to be talking about that a lot. That presupposes a familiarity with the experience of being an author publisher to a certain degree already, and we're not doing that stuff yet in St. Basil's. We're only starting to dip our toes in it at the end of the year for the St. Basil class. It is certainly something that we talk about, and we will continue to talk about at great length inside Story Hearth. Benicio, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a couple questions about the application process, and um, it said 5,000 words of fiction. Does that mean not 4,900, 5,100, 5,000, no more, no less? Is that the like? And
It's
then
more of a
yeah.
guideline. It's more of a guideline. Yeah. Don't send me your 100,000 word novel. Don't send me your 30,000 word
Yeah.
novella. If you have something that is stretching it a little bit, go ahead. I will not read all the way to the end. Just be aware. But that's just a general guideline, and it's basically meant to help you recognize the fact that that is the length of a typical short story. So that if you have a short story, that's the kind of thing that you might want to submit, or the first few chapters of a novel.
Okay. And the I guess I actually have three questions
Please.
total. The second question is, would you accept an excerpt from a larger work?
Yes.
And then, great. And then the third one, I didn't see anything about this, but like if I were to get like a letter of recommendation from an old professor, is that something you would take into account, or would the work just have to speak for itself?
I mean, you could certainly send it. It would be different. Most other people aren't doing it. I'm not sure it would help or hinder. I know for a fact that a lot of recommendation letters are pretty. They're either form letters or they're crafted not by the person giving the recommendation, but by the person asking for it. um, I'm not saying that's what you're going to do. I just know that that often happens. It really the work needs to stand by itself. Yeah. Emily, go ahead.
Hi. If we send an excerpt from a novel, is it important that it's the beginning of the novel or can it be like from the middle?
I mean, I'm not going to tell you what to do or what not to do. I will suggest though that if what you're sending to me uh, requires a lot of context,
Mhm.
contextual knowledge that isn't offered in the first page, then that will be to your detriment. On the other hand, oftentimes beginnings, especially for works in progress, are the hardest things to do, and it's not uncommon for a first novel to have a very bad beginning that will end up being rewritten once the novel is finished. So there is a bit of a tension here, and you're going to have to decide what's your strongest work. Um, yeah,
Okay.
that's what I
That,
would say.
I mean, that's the reason I was asking because the beginning of my novel's not very good anymore now that I'm reading it back. And so I want to
Yeah,
submit something from the
I will say that
middle.
I have accepted people with both middle chapters and beginning chapters.
Okay. But yeah, it makes sense that there needs to be some explanation of terminology and names and whatnot for you to
Yeah,
understand. Yeah.
yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Joseph, please.
Hi. So, how many of the participants are Orthodox versus Orthodox adjacent? I'm Orthodox adjacent, so I mean, I'm Catholic, but I have close Orthodox friends. My nephew, my godson is Orthodox. So I love interacting with Orthodox Christians, but is that I mean, is that a non-starter? Is yeah.
That's not a requirement. No, it's not a requirement. First year we had mostly Orthodox. Second year we didn't, and both years had were very strong in very different ways. Um, I mean, if if you've heard me talking and if you've read my stuff and you've seen me in other contexts, I'm not somebody who hides the way I feel about the world. If the way I talk about these things resonates with you, it's likely that we're gonna have a long and beautiful friendship. To and it doesn't really matter ultimately whether you're Orthodox or not. We're not studying theology here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Chris, go ahead.
Hi. Another submission-based question.
Please.
Would you like just a line or two of context on the book, like what genre or age we're going for? And
It can help certainly. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, Matryoshka Monica, please.
You mentioned that there would be both instructor feedback and um,
Peer.
cohort feedback,
Yeah.
but can you give me more details about what the instructor feedback would look like? How often, to what extent, etc.?
This will largely depend on the class itself. Paul Kingsnorth has everybody read their work in class, and he will respond to it in class. Now he's British, so you have to keep that in mind. His response will be British, and it will be mostly positive. Every once in a while, there'll be a little sparkle of something that is a little bit more emotional than normal, and you have to really like watch out for those because that's really special. um, some will do no feedback at all, or that's been the case. So with Jonathan, it's a little bit difficult to get him to do feedback. He's quite busy, but we're working on a way of integrating feedback a little bit more directly for him. Um, the in between classes is when you have the most directed feedback from me. You send me submissions for critique, and I basically have the work on on my computer screen, and I'll read out sections of it that I find to be interesting or useful in terms of critique or um, endorsement. So sometimes there'll be something that I think that's you've done that really well. Everybody pay attention, see how they did it. And other times they'll be like, okay, so here's something that is a very common beginner tendency. Here's how we avoid it. Here's how we make it better. So those tend to be those people tend to respond really well to those. Um, and the peer-to-peer, and we'll be able to speak more to that if you want more information on that. But I think that you asked more about the feedback from instructors. So also you have access. You will have access to one-on-one story coaching from Catherine Hyde. I think 2 hours. It'll depend on how many students there are, but it's something like 2 hours of direct one-on-one interaction with somebody who is an acquiring fiction editor. That will be on specific manuscripts, and that's very, very useful. So
Thank you.
that answers your question, I hope. Yeah. All right, Joseph, you're back.
Hi. Um, do you know what week the retreat will be? Is that already determined? I couldn't find that one.
Yeah, it'll be the first week of September.
First week. Okay, thank you.
Oh, Anna also has something about feedback in the chat. Underscore, if you want to see it. I won't read it out loud. It's not good for me.
I was hoping you would and then become embarrassed halfway through when you realized.
No, I've learned. All right, Daniel, please.
Yeah, quick question. How large are you thinking this cohort will be?
So we cap it at 15. We would love to have 15. If it's fewer, it's fewer, but we would love to have 15. Yeah. Anyone else?
Oh, I have one more. That's all right.
Yes.
If we were to be rejected for whatever reason for this cohort, we can reapply in another cohort.
Yes, absolutely. And like I said, I will offer suggestions, especially to those that I feel are right on the cusp, in terms of what they can do to increase their chances in future. So, Jasmine, you had a question, and then Daryl.
Oh yeah, I was just wondering this year, how large is the cohort? Is it 15 people?
It's 14. Is that right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Daryl, go ahead.
Okay, so I briefly looked over the site at one point. Just wondering when submissions are open and when they kind of close. Do you have
Submissions are
dates
open
for that?
now. Yeah, submissions are open now, and they close at the end of February. And then we will. That gives me a month to read over all the submissions carefully, and the admission decisions will be made by the end of March. So we'll give you
Thanks.
plenty of time to prepare for the in-person retreat. There's a direct application link in the chat. Thank you, Anna. Molly, please.
Hi, sorry, took me a moment.
problem.
You hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So and maybe I've been running back and forth, so maybe I missed something, but I got like 100 dogs taken care of right now. So I am working, I'm like mid-series right now with my fantasy series. What if I were to get into the workshop, is that going to, like, I've heard it said that you can work on your current project and like kind of like incorporate it into the workshop somehow. Is that correct? And how does that work?
Well, the kinds of things that we're learning are both large scale and small scale type of improvements. So you're gonna start seeing ways that you can improve your writing process from the very beginning. Even when it comes to simply how you arrange your day, how you approach the process of writing, how you set up your writing ritual, the kinds of things that those of us who are already writing regularly still have to deal with all the time, because we are changing human beings, and those kinds of things are always going to be adjusting. Um, the Then you're going to start getting stuff from Jonathan and from Paul that are going to expand your perception of what's possible as a storyteller, and it's going to have immediate ramifications on simply how you write, how you see the act of writing. After that, we're going to get more into the weeds of scene structure and best practices and kind of more higher level stuff like how you write specifically for the expectations of genre, and then how you transcend those expectations to create something that is that might become the kind of thing that gets talked about by the larger culture. So there are things here that are going to that you will be able to incorporate immediately, and you will also be able to continue to incorporate throughout the year. And they're structured in such a way that they're intended to help you with process things at the beginning and craft things towards the end, so that um, you're not immediately thrown into a situation where you're like, oh my gosh, my thing's broken on day one, right? Um, we're bringing you in gently, so that by the time we're getting to the things that might be a little bit more um, difficult to hear, like you shouldn't be doing that in this kind of scene because this is the reader's expectation. It's not going to be a real shock, because you're going to recognize that, okay, this is just a tool, and I have a massive toolbox here, and I'm going to use this for specific cases, and it doesn't mean that I have to just scrap the whole thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Joseph, please.
Um, with the classes, is there a typical time slot they've tended to fall into? Like, is it usually like late night Eastern time, evening West Coast, or is it kind of all over the place depending on the instructor?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the cohort really, because if you have a lot of people that are on the East Coast, it's going to be a certain thing. If you have people that are kind of scattered all over the place, it's going to be something else. We this year we have one UK participant, um, two UK participants. So that made things even more hard, because you can't have it too early on the West Coast time, because that's going to be impossible for, or too late in West Coast time, because it's impossible for people in Europe. That's always a possibility. Like, we're open to international admissions, and we have had Canadians and people from other places apply. So all that to say, it's hard to pin down. This is an ongoing issue. We're talking about ways of possibly kind of anchoring a certain day and time, um, at least once a month or something like that, where we make sure that everybody is live for at least portions of the class. But this is an ongoing thing that we're kind of trying to work out. We haven't fully finalized the process yet.
And one other question is there an expectation that graduates will move forward to public wood between the worlds, or kind of like
No,
wherever
no,
you
no,
want to
no.
go, you do you kind of okay,
Wherever you want to go, you do your own thing. We have the option. Should you choose to use it? Yeah, absolutely.
cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and in terms of talking about publishing options, at the end of the year when we have our sort of landscapes of publishing class, I'm going to be hammering, indie slash self-publishing very heavily, because it's something that I feel very strongly about, and it takes a certain kind of author to do it well. Some people just aren't built that way, and that's fine. But yeah, you're gonna have all kinds of options. There was a hand, but it disappeared, so I'm assuming that I've answered the question. All right,
I
Benicio, go
guess
ahead.
it can come back. It's just like you can totally say that we'll work it out. Like I don't know, like I was gonna ask generally, not what time of it generally falls under, but what days of the week. Because I don't know, someone like me, I work in restaurants right now. Um, Weekends are kind of blocked. I'm there till midnight. It's kind of it's that sort of thing. But
It's generally weekdays. I don't think we've ever had a class on weekends. Yeah, people tend to keep their weekends to themselves, and most of us are active in some sort of church thing on Sundays anyway. So, yeah. Anna has a nice comment there, if you guys didn't see it in the chat. So that's a good one. Well, if there are no other questions, we have several people that have taken the class. If any of you want to just say something to add, maybe I forgot something, maybe I missed something. Nathan, Aislinn, or Anna, if you guys want to chime in, you're more than welcome to. I'm not putting you on the spot, but if you want to say something, you're more than welcome to. Nathan turned red immediately.
St. Basil's is the best. You should all do it. The in-person retreat is literally the highlight of my year. It's something I really look forward to. So I'm now working for St. Basil's, but I'm not saying that just because I'm paid to. I'm working for it. I really love it and I really believe in it. And I think you should all do it. That's all.
Yeah, the we've done the in-person retreat twice, and both times have been, for me as a teacher, they've been absolutely transformative. So I enjoy it as much as you all do. And there's somewhat of a chance that there might be a Paul Kingsnorth sighting this year. So we shall see. Nathan agrees. Thank you, Nathan. Well, if there's nothing else, it's late over here on the East Coast, and I have, as you have heard, 4 kids. So it's time for me to go to sleep, not them. Good. I'm glad you found
Thank
this
you. So
useful.
this is, yes, super helpful. Thank you.
Good. And please, if there's something you wanted to ask that you didn't want to ask in public, send me an email through the St. Basil website. I'm assuming my contact information is there. If not, it should be. But I think that all of the stuff that goes through the contact form comes to me eventually. So reach out to me that way. And yeah, thank you all for coming. This will be recorded and posted on the St. Basil's YouTube channel as well as the website. So you'll be able to share this with your writer friends if they ask you to, or if you want to just shove it in their faces. Highly recommended. Yeah, and if there's any questions that you forgot about, again, reach out to me directly, and I'll be happy to answer. And I'm very much looking forward to getting your submissions. So yeah.
I only have one final parting question that is just
All right.
and who is your favorite Inkling? Since you said this is all supposed to be in the tradition of the Inklings, who's your favorite?
Tolkien by far.
Okay.
By very very far.
Solid.
I haven't read any Owen Barfield, so who knows? Perhaps maybe I'll change my mind someday. But it's definitely not Charles Williams. Let's put it that way. I mean, I like him, but he's not my favorite.
Anna, Ashlyn, Nathan, how about you? Favorite Inklings?
Oh, right. Put him on the spot.
I'm partial to Owen Barfield, but maybe that's because I also am the type of person who likes George in the Beatles because nobody else likes him.
I kind of like Roger Lansing Green. I like what he does with the old classic mythology tales, but probably C.S. Lewis. But for a more fancy answer, I'll go with Roger Lansing Green.
I've probably mostly read Tolkien.
Yeah, Team Tolkien over here. Absolutely. All right, everyone. Thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure getting to know you. Hope to get to know all of you better very soon. And yeah, send me those submissions if you haven't. Yeah, I'm excited to read them. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Have a good one.